Look, Marvel, if every confrontation you have ends in a fist fight, maybe you've got some issues to work out. Hey there, folks. In the wake of the end of Moon Knight, which wrapped up, I'm trying to think of when this video is coming out. Not this past Wednesday, but the Wednesday before, I kind of want to talk about Marvel and more specifically the climax to Marvel products. Well, MCU products in specific. I'm not really going to touch on the comics too much, but the films, the Disney Plus series, etc. I say etc. as if there's anything else. It's those two things. Well, I suppose there was the Netflix. Okay, focus. Come on, I can do it. But if you saw my review of the finale of Moon Knight, you can check the link there. I was pretty disappointed with it. Not because it was absolutely bad on its face, but because instead of focusing on all the stuff that I was really fascinated by and was really digging about the series, the psychological aspects, the philosophical aspects, the messing with the mind, and just the exploration of these characters and the way they interacted, I'm not going to say it got completely forgot, but it got sidelined in favor of Egyptian god kaiju fights and a brawl between two characters, only one of whom it made sense to end in an action sequence, and the other of whom had been a completely psychological and philosophically based character up to that point. So it frustrated me. Again, not because the action scenes had no place in a story like this. Moon Knight had established that, there was going to be action beats. There had been some before. But the fact that it sidelined pretty much everything that I really liked about the show so that it could more fully focus on an action climax, didn't love it. This is starting to become an issue for me with Marvel. Now, I understand how this happened. Part of it just has to do with the nature of comic books and the medium they're adapting from. And the other has to do with the fact that as much variety as exists in the MCU, and I actually stand by the fact that there is a decent variety in terms of genre, tone, and etc., they are ultimately fundamentally all action products, or at least they have been, and they've started to stick certain things into the action box that don't really belong there. Again, for a while it made a lot of sense. When you build something like Iron Man, the Thor films, Hulk, etc., I can use etc. there. That means that, you are building these as action films. Hero, villain, and both are established as physical threats. It will end in a physical confrontation. And that is valid. And that works. And sometimes it even works phenomenally. In Marvel's best ending action scenes, it is so exciting and thrilling and triumphant even. But increasingly, as time has gone on, I found myself going, do we need that? Did that need to end in a fight? Or did that need to end in a fight that was as long as it was? I should probably cite some examples. Now, I've mentioned Moon Knight already, which I've sort of already said some of the things, but I feel like it's very well exemplified by the fact that the villain, Harrow, played by Ethan Hawke, up to that point as a villain, was a philosophical threat. His danger, what made him dangerous, was what he was trying to unleash and his goals in doing so. Philosophically, he was dangerous. His embracing of the idea of you take out dangerous people before they do anything dangerous is a fundamentally dangerous concept. So that is what made him not only an intriguing villain, but also a pretty effective one, at least to me. However, in the end, they give him a magic staff and he just gets into a fist fight with Moon Knight. That's not a climax that fits this villain at all. Especially given that if you want just action and spectacle, he's got minions you can throw at Moon Knight. There's the aforementioned Egyptian deity kaiju fight going on in the background. We've got that. Why is he being thrown into this combat situation? Because we have to end in an action scene. This is something that I really complained about earlier in WandaVision, where I argued not only should it not have ended in an action scene, it shouldn't have had a human villain at all. The instant Agatha was revealed, the show almost immediately fell apart for me. Because everything that was interesting in the exploration of what was going on with Wanda in her head, her expressions of it, and how other people either were or weren't dealing with it, what they were or weren't learning about it, about her, and possibly even about themselves, all went out the window so we could have a wizard fight in the sky. Why? This is not a natural climax and culmination of literally anything that has gone on, especially considering Agatha wasn't even built as like a character embodying the philosophical or mental conundrums that Wanda had been going through. She was just thrown in there so that they could have a villain to fight at the end. And that's no shade on Catherine Hahn. I love Catherine Hahn. I'm even kind of hopeful that the House of Agatha series will be entertaining because it'll take her out of a context where she didn't work at all. Because there needed to be a villain for there to be a fight. I also found myself actually thinking this a little bit about Shang-Chi. It made sense to have a climactic fight. The characters are all fighters. A lot of the conflict has been filtered through combat. So you might be thinking, what are you talking about? You didn't want the action scene in Shang-Chi. Not quite where I was going. Rather, the one-on-one fight between Shang-Chi and his dad apparently would have been too low-key. Even though that is the emotional climax of the film. And everything about the conflict and the characters we are invested in, if the film has done its job well, and I think it did, culminates in that fight. And the film goes on for about another 10 minutes after that with a big CGI monster fest. A pretty one, a pretty well executed one, but a deeply unnecessary one. There's really not much reason for that to be there other than it's not a big enough spectacle just to have Shang-Chi and his dad duke it out in a fist fight. It needs to be a bigger action beat. Now, to be fair, there have been in my mind 2 times so far where Marvel has managed to give a climax that wasn't strictly an action scene. And in both cases, for me, it worked and actually made these more interesting as a result. The first was in the original Doctor Strange. Oh, and I should probably clear up, at time of recording this, I haven't seen Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness yet. So if that ends up being an exception as well, that's why I'm not bringing it up. I haven't seen it yet. Okay, so take that off the table. But the original Doctor Strange, there is kind of an action beat between him and the villain played by Mads Mikkelsen. Kykelius? Is that his name? I can't remember the guy's name. But the thing is, that's not really the climax. The climax is the face down with Dormammu, which is not an action scene at all.
Dormammu, I've come to bargain.
That's not an action scene, and it's amazing. I don't know anyone who didn't love that. Even people who otherwise didn't really like the film or don't like Doctor Strange overall thought that was cool. Because it's really unique. I mean, how many of these films have ending action sequences where you actually remember much about the climactic fights? I'm not going to say there are none. There are some. I'd actually argue Endgame had a phenomenal climactic action scene, a lot of the beats of which stand out to me even now. But a lot of the other ones, like, it just kind of bleeds together. The details that I remember from those films, the things that really stick with me, aren't the action scenes in general, and pretty rarely the climaxes. Actually, I think I lied there. I said there were 2 exceptions. There's actually 3. So the one that I almost forgot about, Captain Marvel, does a really great job subverting the final showdown with the person who has been positioned to be her last opponent, because she just immediately takes him out and there is no fight.
I have nothing to prove to you.
That having been said, I'd call that a half exception because there is still a big climactic fight when she gets fully charged up. It just doesn't include a one-on-one extended showdown with this final villain. But I'd say that's a half exception. So I guess 2.5 exceptions. The other one was Loki. Now, the finale of Loki, I do know there are some people who don't like it. I've seen them in my comments. I love the last episode of Loki. People complain it's nothing but an exposition dump. I don't disagree that it is, but I think it is a masterfully executed exposition dump, portrayed perfectly by a villain who is immediately intriguing and interesting, and whose very concept of what he is and what he does challenges the heroes simply by existing. He doesn't have to fight them to be a challenge to them and for them to have to think about and overcome. And it's made all the better by the fact that Loki and Sylvie come to different conclusions about what should be the next thing that happens. So I really like Loki. And while there is a fight, it's not really the climax. It's certainly not much of what the thing is building to. Now, it is worth pointing out, had Loki not already had a second season confirmed, and had the creators not known, I guess partway through shooting, that they were going to get a second season, this might have annoyed me. Because that was another thing I noted about Moon Knight. The way that everything felt very hastily wrapped up, and at time of recording, and I did double check this, there is no second season confirmed. There are hints that there might be a second season when there were tweets put out on official Twitter accounts initially saying series finale. They were deleted and replaced by ones that said season finale. But even the creators behind that show have been asked, hey, does that mean there's another season? And they're saying, maybe, we don't know. So that's where things stand right now. But I think also that being positioned, that Loki I'm now talking about, being positioned as an ending to a season of a story that would continue, as opposed to the conclusion of the story, maybe that eased some of the burden on the necessity of having an action scene. I mean, maybe not. I could be completely wrong in my speculation about that being the case, but that did work for me. That, Doctor Strange, and even Captain Marvel, just by subverting the final fight, because I was kind of actioned out by the time she faced off against Jude Law's character, whose name I also don't remember, and she just completely took him out immediately. I really appreciated that. First of all, because I actually like it as a moment inherently, and secondly, yeah, I'd had the big action scene. I was done. There have been others that have tried to be a little bit more subversive, but also haven't quite worked. But they've still been more memorable. First Guardians of the Galaxy comes to mind for that. The actual final showdown against Ronan ends up being a dance-off? That's a little different. I honestly don't think it totally works, but it also is the culmination at the end of a very long extended action sequence. So that is, I guess, another kind of half exception, a bit like Captain Marvel, where there is a fairly standard extended climactic action sequence leading up to an unconventional button at the end of it. But otherwise, that's a pretty standard action sequence. Guardians of the Galaxy 2, also a little bit of a half, I suppose, because a lot of what's going on is trying to escape as opposed to get in active fights with a lot of what's going on. And it's really just kind of Quill and Ego battling it out. And even that's pretty unconventional, but it is still an action scene. Even if it's escaping the crumbling planet, that's still an action scene, even if it's not a fight scene. Action scene and fight scene, while frequently overlapping, are not always the same thing. They're not synonymous. Action can take a number of different forms. But anyways, I've now cited some examples, so I want to come back to why I was even bringing this up, my main points. Marvel has built its brand in action movies. Now, action subgenres, sci-fi action, fantasy action, action comedy. We've now had things like Moon Knight dip more into psychological action, you could even argue. But I really want Marvel to branch out. I want it to expand and I want it to grow. And part of how it needs to do that is to not feel obligated to end everything with an action scene. Many films should end with an action scene. And actually, I'd say it's going to be harder for the movies to break away from this than the series. But the series especially, the good series are delving into characters And giving us an emotional climax for the character does not require somebody get hit in the head with a punch or a fireball or whatever. Sometimes it makes sense. It made sense that Hawkeye had an action climax. It made sense that Falcon and the Winter Soldier had an action climax. It didn't really make sense that What If had a big crossover action climax, especially considering that what that show had been about was exploring individual ideas, and then suddenly it's let's smash everybody together and make them fight. That one was a little weird, but then again, I'm also very lukewarm on What If, so I don't want to go down that road too far. But my point is, Marvel, I am a self-professed fan of what you are doing with the MCU and what you have been doing for quite some time. However, don't get stuck in a rut of insisting everything end in an action sequence. Because while it is often the correct way to end these stories, and while it often fits, the times that it doesn't really stand out. With, again, WandaVision probably being the single worst offender on that. But Moon Knight, that's not that much better, at least for me. And that in that case, less because it didn't fit and more because it took away time from the stuff I actually cared about. Understand the priorities of the story that you have crafted, that you have created. Is it more important that this end in a big CGI fight, or is it more important that you bring the characters' personal journeys and their emotional arcs to a satisfying conclusion? Because if that's what's more important, maybe you can go lighter on the action at the end, and maybe in some cases, you don't actually need to do it at all. Will those be as mass appealing? I don't know. There's some people who certainly come to Marvel for action, and it's not like they're going to be missing out. There's still plenty of action franchises in Marvel, and I'm not saying I want those to go away. I'm just saying there's room for more variety, especially at this point. And the more Marvel expands and the more mediums it goes into, the more I think there needs to be a bit more of a shakeup in what we see. Because if it all starts to look a little too similar, that's where people, even me, might start getting bored. And I don't want to be bored with this stuff. I don't always love it. But I am invested enough that I want to keep coming back. More to the point, I want to continue wanting more of this. I don't want to get tired of it. And a good way to just keep me more invested will be for me not to be able to safely assume it's going to end in a fight every single time. Especially if the story probably didn't need it. So some random thoughts spurred on by the ending of Moon Knight. And I don't think this is a massive problem yet, but it's now a pattern I've seen often enough with projects where an action climax didn't fit, but it got one anyway. I had to just say something about it. But what are your thoughts on this? Whatever they are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon's what pays the bills, keeps this whole operation up and running, ensures that I can afford to do things like go see Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness probably tomorrow from when I am filming. But even if you can't help me out there, like, share, subscribe. They all assist. But don't worry too much about it. I'm not going to tell you how this thing has to end. Instead, I'm just going to say that you are beautiful. You are valid. You are loved. You are the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. Hey, end credits time, which means I need to shout out some patrons. This time, I'm going to be shouting out Robin Moore, Zubin Litfala, Tarak, Oliver B., Melinda Walters, Imudelki, Leo the Boy, TT, Fernobulax the Poodle, Zach Paul, Eidolon, Tracy Scrabbit, Vincent Paul Bartolucci, Angry Kasparov, Toku BL Hoovian, Adam RDL Taylor, Shane Ross, Shayla Gourlay, and Brendan LaRose. You want to hear me mispronounce your name? Check out rewards on the Patreon. Thanks for all your support.